Now we're going to look at using effectors, and if you open up this start file, essentially we've just got a cube in a cloner and it's just set up in this way. So where are these effectors and how do you add them? Well, go to the MoGraph menu, and in the effectors list here, we've got all these different effectors that we can add to our cloners. So I'm just going to choose a plane effector. And the way you add effectors is by having the cloner selected, and you can see that once you create an effector, it will be added to the effectors list. You can also, if I delete this, select and delete, I can also drag it straight in, and I'll delete that again. And the other thing I can do is just start one of these pick sessions, which is a little thing you can just click onto what you're interested in. Just remember to just come over and click off it again. So that's a few ways of adding any effector to a cloner object. So now let's go into the attributes of the plane effector. So what do effectors do? Well, they take existing clones and modify their position, scale, and rotation, and other properties. All depends on the type of effector, really. Most share the same attributes, such as this parameter tab here. And you can see that by default, the plane effector is going to move our clones 100 units in the Y axis. So we can add to that. We can change the X, we can change the Z, we can just disable that entirely. Moving over, we can look at scale, and we can check on a uniform scale, make this 1. If we make it -1, it makes the clones disappear, which might sound a bit odd, but it's all relative. It's in a relative transform mode. So if I change that to 0 and make it absolute, the absolute scale would be 0. Back to 1, and they're back to normal. 2, and they're twice as big. It's this kind of like a multiplier, I guess. That's kind of like 2 times as big as it was before. That's normal size in relative mode. We can turn that off now and come on to rotation. And if we look at this, we'll just rotate these all 45 degrees. And the plane effector is just going to look at the clones, and it does not really care. It's just going to say, I'm going to make every single one the same value. I'm going to affect them all 100%. You might want to add in a bit of variation. So how would you do that? Well, you could choose to add a random effector. So I'm going to select my cloner. I'm going to come to the MoGraph menu and then choose to create a random effector. And because I've got the cloner selected, it's going to automatically be added to the effectors list. So what does this random effector do? Well, it's going to now randomly move our clones by 50 units in every axis. And this is all based on a value. If you didn't like the look of this, you could change the random seed and get different looks just by adjusting that value. Another thing you can do with the random effector is drive the other cloners. So let's say we will increase the weight transform, and what this is doing to our cloner, if we just turn off the plane effector, and the order is important, so we'll have to bring the random effector before this, and then the cloner will say, if we go to the transform tab here, let's turn on weight so we can view the weights. You can see that we're getting red to yellow dots, and this is a level of weight and how it will be transformed. So if I just turn that off for now, come back to our effectors. So we have our random effector here, and all that's doing, if I move this up, I like to have the order the same as in the effectors list. So the random effector is telling the clones be a different weight. That's all I want you to be. And then that information is being passed on to whatever's next in the list, in this case, the plane effector. So I need to enable it in the effectors list. So I'm going to check this box and enable it. And now you see that the plane effector is going, right, I'm going to give you a random value of rotation up to 45 degrees. So that's how we can mix effectors and also send information from one effector to another effector. So these types of effectors are ones that will use an initial value of the cloner and then modify it. Another thing we can look at are effectors that would need another object in order to function. So a good candidate would be the spline effector. So I'm going to create a spline. I'm just going to make this on the X, Z and scale it up a bit. And what we'll do is we'll select our cloner and we'll create a spline effector now. So you can see nothing happened. If we go over to the effector tab, because we need to drag in that circle spline, or any spline really. So I'm going to drag that in, and you can see that the clones are moving onto that spline. Well, they're trying to. You see, and we can control the strength of that. So why aren't they cloned exactly onto that spline? Well, it's all about the order of our effectors. The random effector is sending information to the spline effector, and so it's not going to align correctly. So we need to just change that order. So if we move the spline effector first, now the clones are going to go onto the spline effector, then they'll get a random weight, and then that random weight will be passed on to the plane effector. So that's hopefully clear that the order of the effectors is really important. So let's just disable or delete the spline effector for now, and we don't need this circle anymore. And let's look at how we would animate these clones. So what we can do is use the fall off tab for this. At the moment, the shape is infinite. They're going to have an infinite effect. You can use the strength slider in that case, or we can actually change the shape of the fall off to something, say, linear. And if we make the direction follow along with the cloners, which would be positive X here, and you can change the shape just by dragging out these handles. You can change the fall off weight here as well. So you can sort of change the speed at which the effect happens. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm just moving the fall off, which is moving the effector through the clones here. So it might be easier to see if we turn off the random and just have that plane effector affecting the rotation. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make them change position as well. So that should be really clear to see. So if we move back now, as we move the fall off through the clones, they are being modified with that plane effector. So they're moving and they're rotating. Of course, you can animate this. You can change the shape. So sphere. Get that kind of undulating effect. It's quite fun. So yeah, this is a way of manipulating the clones in a specific way. You see, we can just affect this portion of the clones if we want to and leave these ones alone because they don't fall within that fall off. We can, of course, increase the fall off and they'll have that effect. So I just want to show you a quick example that I've set up. And this might look complex, but it's not really. We've just got what we've seen before, a couple of cubes inside a cloner in a linear fashion, and then the cloner is then into another cloner which is being cloned radially. And then we've got some other effectors. Some we've looked at, some we haven't, but they're usually just set to their default values. And I want you to come in here and pick apart this scene and just see what's going on. And you can see that we're getting really interesting animation just based on what these effectors are doing. So what you could do is take this start scene, which is a very similar setup, and then build it up, adding your own effectors. By all means, have both files open side by side so you can start to get an idea of what's going on. I'll give you a little hint just by looking at that. And then you can build up a scene, and that'll hopefully bring your understanding of MoGraph and effectors to another level. So we now know that effectors take existing clones, modify their position, scale, rotation, and other properties. And some effectors will just use the initial value of the objects. Some effectors need another object to drive them. And we can use fall-offs to animate selectively the clones. So have fun getting to know effectors and creating your own version of this animation.